in the realm of our tough text, this one from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, I wish that some of them weren't so tough. Because just in going back through this over the last week and having studied it previously, I just wonder, I hope I'm looking at this the correct way, and I hope that I'm leading you guys down the correct path to try to understand this. Paul in 2 Thessalonians is trying to tell what to these Christians? What's he trying to tell? In the book itself, not just in the 9 verses that we have picked, in the 8 verses that we have picked out, what's he trying to tell these Christians? Because something isn't the way you think it is. Okay, the coming of Christ isn't now. It's not yet. There is going to be something that comes first. And we looked at this in 2 Thessalonians starting in verse 3. So let me just read verses 3 through 10 again for you. Now remember, all through the New Testament, and when I say all through the New Testament, there are at least 4 really good places where it prophesies there's going to be a falling away from the faith, from the truth. You've got Acts chapter 20, you've got this passage, you've got both 1 Timothy 4, 2 Timothy 4, and it warns, people aren't always going to be faithful. So in verse 3 of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first. The man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worship, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things, and now you know what is restraining, that he may be revealed in his own time? For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the breath of His mouth and destroy with the brightness of His coming. The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, with all power, signs, and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Okay, last time we were in the middle of kind of pulling apart and making some comments on these characteristics that are given. So that's where we'll take back up. But we made an important assessment. There's a lot of different ideas on who this man of sin is. And there may even be some differences of opinion in the room. I would be kind of surprised if there weren't. So really all I want to do is focus on one idea, and then that will carry over into our final class, which will be in Revelation chapter 20. Who is the man of sin not? Let me ask that better. Who isn't the man of sin? Who isn't the man of sin? Think about a lot of the religious world and a ton of the Protestant religious world. The man of God, the man of sin isn't who? Isn't who? He isn't who? The Antichrist. Because remember, we talked about that last week. The Antichrist. What is the idea behind the Antichrist? The person who is going to come at a future time, and what's he going to do? We'll go back over all of this when we get to Revelation 20, because it's even more relevant in Revelation chapter 20, and I'll explain why then. But the Antichrist is the person who's going to what? Rise up during the tribulation. Okay? He's going to rise up. He's going to be a world ruler, a world leader during the tribulation. Then Christ will come. The battle of Armageddon will be fought, and 1,000-year reign of Christ is going to be then instituted. All kinds of ideas on who the Antichrist is. I mean, who would you think? It's a very strong idea when I started preaching, and then it just kind of moves along as time moves along. Who do you think a lot of people have thought the Antichrist is? Some have thought he was Hitler. Who else? Stalin. I started preaching in 1991. And guess who people thought he was in 1991? He had a lot of palaces. We went to war with him. Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein. And it was thought that he was Saddam Hussein until the year 2000. And that's when a man named George W. Bush got elected. And then he was the Antichrist. I mean, go back and look. It's just one world ruler after one world ruler who they believe is the Antichrist. And 2 Thessalonians to them, chapter 2, ties into that. Of course, we've been making the case, and I've slowly been making the case, and we'll finish the case this morning, that this man of lawlessness wasn't, I don't in any way throughout the next few minutes intend for you to understand it is a specific person in history. I think it's more of an idea that we've seen actually throughout history. So let's kind of go back and take a look at some of these characteristics. So we first of all talked about just simply the idea of the man of sin and the apostasy. What is the apostasy, or what is apostasy? It was a falling away. The man of sin was yet to be revealed, which means in Paul's day, what was taking place? Some parts of it were beginning to be, you could begin to see it, but whatever it wasn't what? It wasn't fully defined, it wasn't fully shown. Okay, the son of perdition, he's identified as the son of perdition. Perdition means what? Destruction. So the man of sin being the son of destruction, meaning that all of the people who follow him are set for destruction. He was the lawless one. What does the lawless one mean? The lawless one. He doesn't follow God's law. Doesn't follow God's law. That's why the next word, that he opposes God, he exalts himself, and he even sits where? In God's temple. Of course, the Old Testament, and even during the times of Jesus, God's temple meant something to those people. It meant the structure that was in Jerusalem. God's temple, though, began to be known after Jesus died. God's temple was what? The church. So I think as it speaks of sitting in God's temple, he's not talking about a building back then. He's talking about sitting in the church of God now. The next characteristic that we talked about was the lying miracles, the signs, the wonders, the miracles. So those are done by the agency of who? Of Satan. Now, when Satan, this is a really good question, and maybe more than just can be done in this class here. So we'll just discuss it for a moment and then move on, because I don't want to get bogged down in it. But when Satan does it, is it a real thing? When God does a miracle, is it a real thing? Yes, and there's so much evidence. When God does it, it's a real thing. What about when Satan does it? It's not real. In fact, in every time that it's mentioned that it goes into depth, it always talks about that work being a lying one, a lying miracle, meaning a miracle that what? Might look really, really amazing, but it just isn't. I brought up, this was the last thing that we talked about last time, that how many saints are there? in the Catholic Church? I don't know in the Greek Orthodox, but how many saints are there in the Catholic Church? About 10,000. And all of them had to have what? Worked miracles. That's one of the reasons why the process of establishing them as a saint sometimes takes so long, is to establish the veracity they claim of these miracles. But yet, when they're not from God, they're always what? They're always lying. They're always the miracles, the wonders of Satan. Of Satan. So, it was mentioned that it was already at work just a little bit in Paul's day. And in thinking about how it was already a little bit at work at Paul's day, we want to bring up some ideas. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 14. Let's look in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 14. And someone read 1 Corinthians 10 verse 14. It's very short. So if the warning is there, if the exhortation is to flee from idolatry, then you see what is in the church. What are people being tempted with? If you've got to flee from idolatry, people are being tempted with what? With idolatry. You know, the children of Israel were given to idolatry. They were so given over to idolatry that God judged them for it. He took them away into captivity. They came back from captivity. And they pretty much, as far as idolatry was concerned, they pretty much what? They pretty much had given up on it. But then time marches on. And you have the uniting in the intertestamental times of the Roman world with the Greek world. The Greek world came first and then became united with the Roman world, which gave us what kind of gods? The Greco-Roman gods, sometimes referred to as the pantheon. And these are all the gods that you're aware of. Zeus and Mercury living on Mount Olympus. So that made its way into the church. And Paul has to tell them in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 14, to what? You're going to have to flee from idolatry. So there's already notions, there's seeds there that are showing people are beginning to start to think about something that's not in the Bible. Colossians chapter 2, verse 18. Let's notice another one. Colossians chapter 2 and verse 18. And what does Colossians 2 verse 18 say? So the worship of what? The worship of angels. So the worship of things that aren't established in the New Testament. There were also different seeds. So not only do we have the seeds of just falsehood, of idolatry and the worship of angels, but we also have other seeds, and those other seeds become just as important in what might happen. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 3. Let me illustrate what I mean. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and someone read verse 3. So they had what? In verse 3. They had division and strife. They had division and strife. When you have an issue, there's two things that it's not funny. It's ironic. Let me put it that way. That when issues come up, you can almost always attribute it to one of two things. In the business world, well, let me just tell you. For example, if you deal with couples, and couples are having trouble, it always revolves around two things. It's either about money or it's about their sexual relationship. So all problems all boil down to either money or something relating to sex. It is surprising how often in our world that is indeed the case. In the church, Paul had to warn about money. 1 Timothy chapter 6, what did he have to warn about? The love of money is the root of all evil. Does anyone remember a very old word called simony? This might be the first time you've heard the word simony in decades. Has anyone ever heard the word simony? Anyone ever heard the word simony? Take the Y off. Where do you think it comes from? Simon. So simony is the process of buying something in the church with what? With money. Who is the classic case of having the capability to buy what you want in church with money? The Catholic Church. And again, Catholicism came along and was well established with the process of simony. Okay? In the New Testament, none of it is fully developed, but all of the framework is in place for what to happen. Think of what Paul said in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. All of it was in place for there to be a big, big apostasy to begin to happen. Okay? Some other ideas that we won't go to. Colossians chapter 2, there were human traditions. In 3 John, Diotrephes, you're starting to see what take place. Not only strife and division, but what? With Diotrephes, with one man beginning to exert undue authority over others. All of this is beginning to sound like what, guys? All of this is beginning to sound like what? What happened with the Catholic Church. This is, I'll say it again, and I mentioned it last week, this is an idea that has been around for a long, long time. How long has the Catholic Church been around? How long has the Catholic Church been around? We talked about this last time. We just talked about it from the opposite direction. We talked about when it developed. So how long has it been around? Okay, it's been around, let's just say, around 1,500 years. Around 1,500 years. But what happened to those prior 500 years? Because we go back 2,000 all the way to the time of Christ. What happened in those first 500 years? All of it was what? It was all developing. It was all developing. Slowly, one by one, decade by decade, century by century, the church was slowly creeping away from the standard of the New Testament. And there came a point when that wasn't restrained anymore, because we do need to talk about the fact that in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, I haven't touched on this yet, but it brings all of these characteristics, and all of these characteristics could be seen in what develops as Catholicism. But there's a couple of things. First of all, the man of sin would be restrained. Restrained. Until such a time, and he wouldn't what? He wouldn't be restrained any longer. Okay? So, when did the Roman Empire fall? Again, I'm asking for a date that honestly is heavily debated. But when did the Roman Empire fall? The date is often given as AD 476. AD 476. That's when the Roman Empire and emperors were basically kind of no more. And when that took place, that was when the role of the church began to really take place. In our country, we have a separation of what? Church and state. They didn't have that back then. So after 476, after the Roman Empire was gone, it didn't take very long until mankind started to enter into what's known as the what? The Dark Age, the medieval times. And in the medieval times, guys, who had power? The Catholic Church. Over everything. Over everything. I mean, kings and princes would bow down to the power of the Catholic Church. A lot of times in church history, I took our young men through this. A lot of times in church history, we study what happened in the 1st and 2nd century, and then we move all the way to the 1800s and the 1900s, but we skip all of that intervening time. And then that intervening time, the Catholic Church, effectively reigned supreme from the time that the Roman Empire fell until a time in the 1500s. What happened in the 1500s? The Protestant Reformation. So for 1,000 years, the Catholic Church was basically unchecked. For what it's worth, I think the best explanation of this passage is seen in the development of Catholicism. There are a lot of different ideas. To me, nothing fits better than to see the man of sin not be a specific pope, of which there have been a lot of them, from Pope Francis all the way back to Peter. Again, you can get online, they trace every single one of them. But just simply the development of that papal authority. And Paul assures in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that all of this is going to last until what time? Until Christ is going to come again. So the point that he's warning about really so much to me isn't that, in the year 606, you're going to have Boniface III, who's able to reign over a Catholic church now, and a division between, or a growing division between the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church. That's not necessarily what Paul was talking about. What Paul was saying in Thessalonians is that all of these people were, just giving up, doing everything, waiting on the coming of Christ. But what is Paul saying is going to happen before the coming of Christ? There's going to be a falling away or an apostasy. And this apostasy is not going to be something that's quick. It's going to last for how long? It's going to last until Christ comes again. It's going to take a long time to develop. So you need to, thinking about Paul's message to the Thessalonians, you need to do what? You need to get, now remember, most specifically in the letter to 2 Thessalonians, you need to what? You guys have given good answers, but you need to get back to work. You need to get back to work. And along with getting back to work, the other answer that you guys gave, which is a great answer, is what? We need to be ready. We need to watch and be ready. Because this is going to last. This great apostasy is going to last until the time of Christ. And it's really sad because we go back and we look in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I'm going to eventually stick this in chapter 3 before it's all over. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. If you'll notice in verse 10, with all unrighteous deception among those who perish, because they what? Did not receive a love of the truth that they might be saved. Okay? Why are people not saved? They don't what? They don't love the truth. Now, this text is one of the toughest ones. It's one of the toughest ones. I've given you what I believe makes the most sense to me. Of all of the characteristics that are given in this passage, the development of Catholicism and the development of the papal authority in all of its way, shape, and form over the next several hundred years, I think fits this passage best. But ultimately, the same thing that allowed this to develop is the same thing now that keeps people in spiritual darkness. They just don't what? They just don't love the truth. And furthermore, to take care of another pretty difficult thing, let's keep on going in verse 11. And for this reason, God what? Will send them strong delusion that they should believe the lie, and that they may all be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So 11 and 12 sounds very what? From God, it sounds very what? How do you reconcile this? Knowing the character of God, very, very quickly, how do you reconcile 11 and 12? That God will send strong delusion. You've got a choice, because remember, and I've got to make this really quick, the idea of sending is also the idea of allowing. So what does God allow on the face of the earth? He allows error, He allows sin, He allows strong delusion. People who love the truth can see through it. But if you refuse to, then what's going to be the answer? You're going to be lost. If I just think about this along the lines of Catholicism, I'll give you some of the examples that I've come across in my lifetime. In talking to people who are Catholic, and there are former Catholics in this congregation, but in talking with people in former Catholic, and trying to get them in a Bible study, you know what answer I've been given? First of all, the answer was no, but do you know the reason that I was given? I've had more than one person tell me that my priest wouldn't like me studying the Bible with you. My priest wouldn't like me studying the Bible with you. You know, why is that? What does that teach someone? Well, it can't do anything except teach someone to not love the truth, to turn away from truth, to not investigate truth. And Paul said before Christ comes, there's going to be this great apostasy where all of this is going to take place, and it's going to last until Christ comes again. Okay, the last thing, Jenny and I will be gone next Sunday, but the Sunday after we'll take care of Revelation chapter 20.